All right. Hello, everyone. I'm with Sir Anthony and the Duke, Brandon Duke. Love
Hi.
that name.
Yeah.
My name's Carlos. So I'll set this up. So we are focused on thekingdom.org, Restoration Fellowship. If you want information about us, you can go here. And today we're going to talk about an issue that's close to the heart of both of these gentlemen. I'll set it up by saying that when you click on the books, you can go to Anthony's obvious book list. He's written many books. Well, the first one is Keegan Chandler. That's a book we published by a gentleman in Tejas. So Anthony is going to talk about things related to a little booklet he wrote called The Law, the Sabbath, New Covenant Christianity. And when you click on it's a free PDF. If you're on a hard copy, let us know as well. Just send us an email and we'll be glad to send you some. And once that opens the PDF, and you should see it there. So, all right, let's get started here. So there I am. I think I can be seen. So I'll just set it up, Anthony.
I can see.
Quickly here. So Brandon is in St. Louis. Brandon?
Yep.
We are in Atlanta, Georgia. So both.
In honor of that, here's my sweet iced tea.
Yeah. St. Louis.
Yep.
Pronounced with an S on the end. St. Louis, I think.
Yeah.
So let's see. So let me do it this way. So we'll let Brandon, Anthony, just do a little intro, Brandon, about your background and
sure,
and what you want to talk about today with Anthony.
That sounds good. Well, first of all, thanks for taking the time to have this conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, as Carlos was saying, I'm a preacher's kid, and my dad went to build an ambassador college in Pasadena that was part of that Worldwide Church of God.
Yeah, what year was that? Sorry, what year was that?
So he was late 70s, early 80s. I want to say he graduated in 81 or 82.
Okay.
And that's actually when I was born. I lived the first year of my life in Pasadena.
Yeah.
And then when they graduated, they moved him to the college in Big Sandy, Texas.
Yep.
Where Dad taught and did various sort of administrative functions. He was dean of students for a while.
Yes.
Anyway, I grew up there. By the time I guess I'd have been a preteen, like 11 or 12. That'd have been 92, I guess, or 93. That's when that church went through their conversion back towards orthodoxy, I guess. And my dad resigned. Felt like he couldn't be a part of that. So we started a new life, and eventually Dad took his ordination to one of the splinter groups and served there for a while. But then that group too splintered. And so we've spent the last, 15 years or so, I guess, in home fellowship. And I'm connected to you guys through some of your Facebook work and other people that you've associated with. That book by Keegan was influential on me, along with a few other things. So I was already guessing an unorthodox place. So it was the Unitarian position was easy for me to get into. But I still hold some pretty unorthodox views, which I guess we could talk about today. You guys get to be on the side of orthodoxy for once, I guess.
So Sabbath, holy days, and new moons. Yes, that's true.
Yes, right. Yeah. Sabbath, holy days, and new moons. Yeah. And part of this is, you have an inherited, narrative. There's just views that you hold that you were taught. Some of which you've thought through, some of which you feel like you can defend.
Yeah.
Others of which, and all of which I'm open to understand better, or I'm very okay with being wrong if it means I'm leaning towards truth. So my favorite story as a kid in the Bible was Solomon being asked, what God offered, what do you want? And Solomon decides that he wants wisdom, and God says, okay, so you're going to get everything else too. So I always respected Solomon. I wanted to follow on that. So still trying to do that, and so I'm trying to get people that are thoughtful and that can help me. So
Well, Solomon's prayer is very interesting. He wants an obedient heart.
Mm.
And that's an Armstrong thing. It was all about obedience, and it is.
Sure.
However, it's a question of what you're obeying and who and why.
Right.
So we're impossible, because I came out of this thing, 60 years ago.
Mm.
I knew nothing. So I had no prejudice for or against Sabbath keeping, the Church of England, nothing. But I simply read the 10 Commandments, and it says you're to keep the Sabbath, and that's true. It nearly broke me, the whole Armstrong thing. I was at the college before your father, from 1960 to 65, and the whole mood of it was a frightful experience for me, partly because I was British, perhaps in a very American setting. Not to blame America, because it's a wonderful place. However, that system failed for me, and you can count that as a negative thing, if you want to. However, I will say this to you, that Armstrong was not in a position to deal with Greek words at all. I'm trying to be a snob. In every other profession, I am a snob to this extent, that if you've got people who are equally impassioned to get to the truth, it doesn't help if you have no learning at all. And Herbert said some ridiculous things about Colossians 2, and that's a sensitive area we'll get into. He didn't know. I don't blame the man. I knew him. Have you read the story of his life, and have you seen what Ted did? That's a very bad atmosphere to be, may I suggest to you. If their theology is really so good, it's at least a paradox that Ted was a playboy. I've spoken to the women who slept with him. I don't want to bring all that up, but one has to be at least vaguely aware of that.
Absolutely.
And I think it's a factor, but it's not the main factor. It's the Bible. I love your background, because your dad is so good. I mean, he's done so well to search this out. Is he living, your father, still?
He passed away here recently.
Okay, I'm sorry to hear that.
Well,
but you see, he did you a service. He got you impassioned about getting it right in the Bible. Yeah. And that's a marvelous thing. So let's see where we go from there.
All right, guys, let's see. So to give this some kind of a format for our viewers, so we're live on Anthony's Facebook, or we should be.
Mm-hmm.
So if time permits, any comments or short questions,
sure,
others, because this is for the benefit of both sides. So first, Anthony, so by the way, while one of you is talking, I'll have to mute the one.
Okay.
Just to give it some kind of
good
system here. So Brandon, let's go to you. We'll start with you. So tell us your current, so you're working out certain things you said.
Yeah.
So let's go with you want to talk, let's go with the Sabbath issue first.
Sure.
So give us, I guess, the Sabbatarian, as it's known, view of, there are many millions, I guess, of Christians who try and keep the Sabbath, the Saturday, and they congregate or they get together Saturday. Some of them, the ones we've interacted with, they vary, they're from what I would call an extreme form, where they call us devil worshippers for getting together on the Sunday. By the way, we don't take any of this personally out there. So, we face attacks every day, and we don't battle flesh and blood. We battle, obviously, the spirits behind that. And we're here to tear down any bad arguments, errors. That's what Paul says. So it's nothing personal. Believe you me, our ministry is totally nonviolent. We're sort of the pacifist branch. So, there are different types of it. So tell us your understanding, your current understanding.
Sure. And I'd want to first humbly say I'm by no means a great, I can't be a spokesperson for this view. So all the Sabbatarians that are out there that are like, hey, pal, do your homework. Please bear with me, forgive me. Likewise, both you and Sir Anthony.
No problem.
So, look, my view is similar to what Sir Anthony has described. I would argue that the Sabbath was instituted at creation, that as part of the covenant with his people at Mount Sinai, God lays that out as part of his instruction for them, how to do that. And it looks to me that there was some additional that there was additional refinement that had to happen to that over time to describe exactly what did that mean? How many sticks could we pick up, and could we start a fire, and all these kinds of things. So so I also would say that I deeply believe that Christ came to fulfill the law. And so I would want to say that there must be some kind of fulfilled version of that. I mean, obviously, there are examples of Christ being the Lord of the Sabbath, and he was often criticized for breaking it, or at least that's my understanding. And so there's got to be some, to me, middle ground between, this is my view, between abandoning the Sabbath, because it seems to me to be an ordinance for all times, or on the other side, having some kind of legalistic view of it, that prevents us from benefiting from it. It seems like it had certainly become a burden to people. I knew people in my life that it was a burden. In the modern era, I'm thinking biblically that it was a burden to the Jews, and that Paul's talking about that. But I mean, I knew people in my life that they were afraid to go flip a light switch, right? Because they might be on the Sabbath, because they might be setting a fire. To the point where it prevented them from worshiping. It prevented them from being together with family. It prevented them from, in my view, really accomplishing what the day is for. So, so broadly speaking, that's my view. And I would say, I don't want to expand the topic too much, but to me, it seems to be intertwined with, in particular, the festival calendar, as a template for, this is an Armstrong teaching, but I don't think only him, but that the festival calendar was a template for God's overarching plan for humanity, sort of a schedule for his workings, if you will. And I see both of those as still being really relevant to Christians today. And then we never did participate in new moons, watching for new moons. That was actually something I didn't even know existed until here recently. So I can't speak to that at all. And I was only vaguely aware of the arguments for moving the day to Sunday. And I had always thought about it that way, that it had been moved, that like the Sabbath had been reordained on another day or something, and had seen that in sort of a Catholic apostasy kind of a view, like the Catholic Church had taken things, taken a right turn in the first couple of centuries, and instituted this new day that wasn't Hebraic. So that's the background where I'm coming from, and if I've not been clear or something, feel free to.
So do you currently, do you have a fellowship, or?
Yeah, just home fellowship with family.
And you get together on a Saturday?
Yeah.
Okay.
Although it's pretty, I mean, it's not, I would not be a great example of some, I have to separate what I think about things from how I do. I really relate to Paul talking about, why is it that I do this, and I want this, and I do that. So I'm certainly an example of a sinner that's not consistent. I mean, I haven't been keeping the holy days consistently like I used to, without sort of a group to do it with. And so part of this is a discussion for me to decide how to go forward. I mean, yeah, we do, but it's a Bible study sort of sitting around the living room. It's not anything as formal as what most people would do. So that's where I am now.
All right,
No,
sir.
I understand you very well, because I've been there. You don't understand me from my Church of England background, where, to use my Southern, I knew nothing about nothing. And I'm not kidding you. I was there. I sat in church for 20 years, went to all, quote, best schools, to get the good education, which means nothing in itself. And I knew nothing about any of this until somebody came and pointed out the kingdom of God in Isaiah 2. I would urge you to keep with that gospel of the kingdom forever, unchanged, because that's a vision of mankind at peace. And that is a wonderful inspiration to me. I stick with that. When it came to the Sabbath, it was perfectly clear. It's in the Ten Commandments. I didn't know what the Ten Commandments were. I had to look them up. And sure, absolutely. I am not quite convinced that it was instituted formally in Genesis. That's a separate issue. Certainly under Moses, it's a commandment. So if you're going to be a Sabbath keeper, I think you have to keep it. I meet people today who say, well, I keep the Sabbath, but if I have to work on it, that's fine. And I simply say, well, that's your view, but it's not a biblical view. Don't pretend that's a biblical view, because you get killed if you pick up 6 on Friday night. This is not kidding. Right. You don't, occasionally not commit adultery if you feel you should do it. I mean, that's just a silly argument for me. So you either keep it or not. And I would agree that it's a picture of God's plan. It is. The Passover is clearly to do with the death of Jesus. I don't know that tabernacles fits the 1,000 years as well as we thought. That's a little bit less clear to me. But my goodness, the Day of Atonement is when future reconstituted Jews, and I would urge you to not lose that part of the story. I think we are the Israel of God now internationally, but that's not the whole story. God has not finished with Israel, the nation. I'm not a BI person. Maybe you are. That's fine. I wouldn't argue that with anybody. Maybe we are Israel over here. That's an ethnic thing for me. I'm outside my scope. But so I'm agreeing with most of what you're saying. My sticking point comes only when I see Paul saying, don't let anybody take you to task or criticize you or judge you for 3 items. And I think Paul has the same level for each one. I would love to make a distinction. You know, the 10 million Seventh-day Adventists make a distinction. They say that Paul's talking about the annual, monthly, and annual. I talked to Bakayaki. I've tried to engage the best people in the field, and he said that's silly. So he disagreed with the SDAs on that. It's not ABA. Come on, common sense. It's not ABA, it's ABC. That is the calendar. And so if you're going to insist, and you are not, by the way, your approach is admirable. Don't let me bully you for a moment, but check your truth against my error, whatever it turns out to be. But if you're going to argue for the weekly Sabbath, you really have to argue for the annual Sabbath and I think the new moons. That would be my first logical point. A single shadow seems to include all of them. And it's the only time that Paul mentions the word Sabbath, as you know. Of course, he goes to the synagogue on the Sabbath and he meets Jews and all of that I see. But to call it a shadow negatively contrasted with the substance, which is the risen Messiah, that's an awfully difficult argument on the strength of the Sabbath being frightfully important. So that's my first point. It's a single shadow. It's negatively contrasted. Now, Herbert couldn't deal with that. I don't blame Herbert. He didn't know a word about Greek, but he used to say the Greek means it's a sacrificial part of the Sabbath that Paul is against. That's what was in the booklet now taken out. I read that with great care, and I believe what Herbert said. But he was talking nonsense in terms of Greek language. I don't blame him. It wasn't his thing. Yeah. So that's where I am today. The Sabbath is a shadow. Certainly, we have a rest in Christ. Hebrews says that. I think that Jesus is our Passover, and we should be celebrating the feast probably continuously. So I'm spiritualizing that, you know, the sort of thing we didn't want to do. And I don't want to do that. I want to take everything exactly literally. But I would have to be dishonest with myself if I thought that Paul was advocating Sabbath keeping. The opposite seems to be true there. So don't let anybody take you to task in that single shadow. So whatever this is, it's negative compared with Christ. That part I can't get around.
Can I?
Yeah, please.
Can I ask a question? Both of the verses actually that Carlos had pulled up, I've got questions about both of them.
Yeah.
Because the booklet Carlos was showing, I should have grabbed it before we started. I bring my dog-eared copy over here of your booklet on it.
Yeah.
But my question is, I've looked at other translations of that Colossians 2:16-17, and I've read. I couldn't give you a name, but I've read commentators and other Seventh-day folks that argue that it says that don't let anyone criticize you for the manner or the way in that you feast. Is that the counter argument?
It simply says in the Greek "en meri," which doesn't mean in a part of. That was Herbert's very amateur approach. That simply means in respect to. We're talking about in regard to is correct. That's what Greek "en meri" means. In regard to. Herbert's argument was like saying, well, we know what understand means because it's standing under. in the language business, and happens to be my trade. I'm very bad in most other subjects. It happens to be the etymological fallacy. I hate to use the long words, but that's just a fallacy. No, it means in regard to holy days, new moons, and I saw in the translation that was put up there, Sabbath days. That's an error. Now, we're getting a little technical. Sabbaton in Greek is plural. It's pronounced the same in modern Greek as a singular, Sabbaton, slightly different, Sabbaton, Sabbaton. Now you look in the Ten Commandments, you can check this, you'll see it's plural. So remember to keep the Sabbath days? No. There's a reason for this. This is getting unnecessarily complicated, but Savata in Aramaic looks like a Greek plural. Avata in Aramaic, it's a word for Sabbath. It looks like a Greek plural. So it came out in the Septuagint sometimes as a Greek plural, but the meaning, as any decent commentary will tell you, is singular. So that's a false translation. He's simply not saying ABA. Holy days surely are the annuals, aren't they? And the monthly, and then the Sabbath day. That's the calendar in my booklet. I think 11 times that trio. So I don't think we can disturb that trio. But I admit that's a little bit of a technical language. You can look it up, though, in your Septuagint, and you'll see plural Sabbath days for the Ten Commandments. So remember the Sabbath days? No. That's not what it means. That you'll find in any decent commentary, F.F. Bruce, which isn't easy for you to get access to. And I think your approach is so admirable. I want to praise you for that. And let's hope we all come out on the right side in the end. What does strike me as interesting is whatever this is he's talking about, this trio, it's negatively contrasted with the body of Christ. Don't let them judge you in these things which are a shadow of things to come. And I've had to point out that Adam is a shadow of Paul says is. That's quite an interesting point, because when in Paul's mind, that's what Adam is. It doesn't say Adam was a shadow of things which were going to come. But we know that in our English today, Hebraic thinking, if you like, then Adam was a shadow type, Paul says, of Christ. I get that. So I think those things were a shadow of what has come. And it seems to me that the contrast is the risen Messiah. Then I find some support for that in Hebrews, where the shadow is a negative thing, twice over. So it's awfully hard for me to believe that Paul is really saying, remember now not to be taken to task in the calendar, which is a really good thing because it's a shadow of what's still coming. And you could argue it's a shadow of the tabernacles, and you can argue it's going to be kept in the millennium too. I see that. But for the moment, that argument is not totally persuasive, because that's the way Paul deals with the Sabbath or Adam and so on. So it's a shadow, but I see that. I also see those in 1 Corinthians 16, they're doing something strange. Not a Sabbath. The Sunday is not the Sabbath day. Nobody's suggesting that. It's not. It's not a transferred Sabbath. But what are they doing in 1 Corinthians 16? Every single Sunday, bring your money. So there should be no collections when I come. That strongly at least suggests that they're doing something on the first day of the week, every first day, not just on one Sunday. So that's the closest that Protestants can get to saying, Sunday seems to have replaced it, but it's not the Sabbath day. I don't keep the Sabbath deliberately. We went shopping one Friday, way back in I'm impossible here. Forgive me, I'm impossible in something. We went shopping in 1974 after all the terrible stuff about Ted came out. We didn't know about a word of it. We'd have left 50 years later. I was only in 14 years. Sorry, I'm exaggerating. 14 years. So we left eventually because the sex stuff was worse than ordinary sinners. Most people don't commit incest. You've read the stuff. Ted was impossible. The poor man. God have mercy on him. He died of a medical mistake eventually. It's a very tragic story. But when we came up, we went shopping on a Friday afternoon after sunset. And we could hardly bear it. Whoa, no, what are we doing? We must be going to hellfire forever. But I don't feel that way now. And I don't feel the Spirit of God has been taken from me. God has had now, and I don't want to be prejudiced here. I want to be truthful, but God has had every chance, I think, to teach us otherwise. I can only say before Jesus right now, I'm doing the best I can, and I'm feeling free, actually. The same with circumcision physically. I see Paul being very strongly against that and the whole law. What is this whole law that Paul is against? That's what I ask people. Because we're dealing with people who want to do physical circumcision as a matter of religious thing, Jews and Gentiles.
Can I chip in here? Brandon, most Sabbatarians about the circumcision, they do accept that as a spiritual thing, and it's no longer valid under the is that your position as well? Circumcision of the flesh?
Yeah, I would see that Paul is advocating against circumcision of the flesh.
Right. Even though it's an eternal commandment, right? So in Genesis 17, I believe, it says that the commandment to circumcise all the males, foreigners, slaves, etc. This is my eternal covenant. Because I wanted to get to the eternal aspect of it, because a lot of the pushback, Anthony and Brandon, is that Well, these commandments are eternal. You're saying these things passed. Can you comment on that, Brandon, first, and then?
I've done a little study. I've done a little bit of study on that, and I understand that there some of the language that gets used there means for as long as it lasts, rather than having some kind of definite ending.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, not that I'm the expert. Let Sir Anthony answer, but yeah, that would be my understanding too.
Yeah. It's aionios that in the Greek word, and to do with olam in the Hebrew, and it's as long as the conditions pertain. But clearly, in the case of physical circumcision, which is ordained forever and ever and ever, same word, we don't think, and that is a huge change, and you're agreeing with that. It's terribly different to sacrifice, to circumcise or not circumcise. So that gives us some prejudice there, I think, against weekly Sabbath keeping.
Right. So here we have, I don't know, can you see that, Brandon?
Got it.
So we have some very explicit text there about this is an everlasting covenant. Circumcision is the sign of the everlasting covenant. Yeah. So we have these, I don't know, half a dozen, maybe a dozen times regarding Sabbath specifically. Now, yeah, so
and I would not base my argument on that.
No.
Okay.
No, that's fine.
No, if as I would see it, I would say that it's a command until it's revoked. So yes. I mean, if I felt there was clear teaching,
right?
While we're in the discussion, if I felt there was clear teaching that said that Jesus says, forgive the paraphrase. If Jesus said, "I came not to abolish the law, except for these parts, and here are the parts that I'm abolishing," and for sure, don't be cultural Jews. Right. And here are all the things that are wrong with that. I would submit to that. That's no problem.
Yep. I get that. Yes. Let me just deal with that point, if I may, Carlos, because Jesus, in fact, I think in Mark 7:19, revoked the food laws. That's a little bit of a grammatical thing. Leaving that one alone, he said, "Don't stone that woman." That was exactly what the law said you should do. Yeah. He also said there were people who broke the Sabbath even in the Old Testament. So when he says, "I came not to abolish a jot or a tittle of it," he could not mean, "I mean in the letter." Now we're getting to the crunch for it. What if he means that not a jot or tittle of the Torah will be abolished in the letter, in the spirit? Yeah. So that's what I see Jesus doing. He's spiritualizing. It's not sufficient not to hate, not to kill your enemy, you mustn't hate him. Isn't that a huge lift into spirituality? Well, why not on the Sabbath day, possibly?
I agree with that. I actually would argue that we need to see the Sabbath in a way that they didn't before.
Good.
I would agree with that.
Unpack that for us a little more.
So this is a received teaching. So like we were heretical even within the worldwide church, folks. It's standard for us, I guess. I haven't been orthodox with anybody ever.
No.
Should have heterodox tattooed on my arm.
Blame your dad for that. Blame your dad for that. Yeah.
Look, I've always thought that the idea is there is this new covenant and exactly that passage that you go through. He goes through several of the laws and says, "Look, here's the fullness of that law." And so I absolutely see that, and so I think we need to have the same view for. I'm looking for a fulfilled and an elevated version of Sabbath and of the holy days as well. I look, even something as simple as there's all these old laws. What do you do if your neighbor's mule falls in the hole you dug, and all those kind of things.
Right.
All of those to me are pointing to some higher moral law that we're supposed to be internalizing through Torah.
Yes, exactly right. That makes perfect sense. But where does that take you in terms of Sabbath keeping? That's the issue. If you're going to work on the Sabbath ever, I just say you're not a Sabbath keeper.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it seems like the fundamentally it's about rest and orienting ourselves towards God.
Yes.
And so I would be more liberal in my view of that, I'm sure, than some other Sabbatarians.
Yes.
I mean, there are lots of things that we do on a Saturday that your experience of the taboo of shopping on Friday night. I relate to that. I remember growing up, and you didn't turn the TV on or things like that. Right?
You're not doing that today. You're not as strict as you were when you started.
No, but I would want to say that that day of rest is an important, unless I can be moved that there's some other way to understand that. I would say there's got to be let's use the word spiritualized version of that Sabbath.
Yes.
And
how
I
about
would
all
say,
the time? How about a sabbatismos? There remains, either future or present, a sabbatizing. A sabbatismos is not exactly weekly Sabbath keeping, so Hebrews uses that word. That takes us in some direction, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I need to go look. I'm not familiar with the passage that you're referencing, so I need to.
Oh, in Hebrews, there remains therefore a sabbatismos. That's a tabbatism, not a weekly Sabbath keeping, I think. So that's possibly an area to look at. You're agreeing, I think, with Bakioki of the SDAs against the Seventh-day Adventists that he led, that you've got all three in Colossians. You haven't got ABA, you've got ABC. So whatever it is, it seems to me they're equal status for Paul there.
Anthony, let me just share this. Is this the passage, Hebrews 4?
Yeah.
So verse 9, Brandon? This shows that the Sabbath for God's people is still to come. God rested after he finished his work, so everyone who enters God's place of rest will also have rest from their own work, just as God did.
Yes.
So let us try as hard as we can to enter God's place of rest.
That doesn't sound like weekly Sabbath keeping there.
No, that's certainly, to me, like I said, I need to go read all the context. I'm not familiar with it, but yeah, I'm with you. And obviously there is a sense in which, there's a sense in which the ultimate rest is coming with a kingdom, and
absolutely.
So I wonder how much that's pointing to that as well.
Yeah. It's always hard to know the presence of the kingdom. I'll agree with everything you say about the presence of the kingdom, but people, and you also believe in the future kingdom, but people don't. So I'm about to write a book, short book, to show that nobody defines the gospel. And you would agree with me here. They don't define the gospel as Jesus did. Herbert got that right. He plagiarized that from the Church of God Seventh Day. You might not know that. But that was a great point that I'm still working at, daily. So
yeah, I totally agree with that. They're
amazing.
Yeah, I think that's really meaningful, and it's funny. I relate to your horror at some of the abuses of Armstrong personally.
Yes, of course.
People there were people that were harmed because they were told not to seek medical attention.
Absolutely,
were shamed for if there was more faith, there would be more healings. There's all kinds of, not to mention his and his son's personal failings. So I've had to try to, not to mention, I got a front row seat to hypocrisy of, 60% of the people that were there that were absolutely committed to this one view stayed there and accepted Trinitarianism and turned a 180-degree turn.
Yes.
And of the people that left, I watched my parents in many ways suffer because they didn't wait until the golden parachutes are ready, right? There was no place to go to, right? There were plenty of people, and now I'm sure he's going to step on some toes so he sees this, but there were people that they waited until they never missed a paycheck, right? They went from Worldwide Church straight to one of the splinter groups.
Really?
And so, so I got a front row seat to the worst of
no, you did.
Christendom.
I saw that too, and let me add this to you. I knew Stavrididis very well, and I watched the whole shenanigan by which he preached the Trinity from the pulpit. So there was a massive dishonesty, groupthink at work, which you observed. That's not very healthy. If we really had the truth as well as we should, we could have done better than that. Anyway, that's obviously our story. We came out. We don't keep the holy days. I'm very much aware of them. We talk about them, the second coming, the trumpets obviously are connected. I get that. Yeah. But the Friday sunset doesn't cause me to lose my job. In England, they did. You know that. Yeah. They lost their jobs on Friday sunset. Yeah. The other thing was the divorce and remarriage. Anybody who's remarried, I saw a misery beyond comparison in people who were not allowed to be married a second time. I'm not for free divorce and remarriage, but there is such a thing as divorce. Jesus said that. We didn't deal with that. So the damage collectively was huge, actually.
Yes. So I'm trying to separate the wheat from the chaff there, right? Of course you are. Which obviously you are too. I want to say I try to be both aware of the cynicism that's to some degree built into me from seeing that, but also like you said, there are certain teachings there that are
Yeah.
really valuable.
Yeah.
And Carlos, don't let me take us off track of where you want to go, but one of the questions
All
I
right.
want to ask Anthony is in regards to the festivals.
Yeah.
It seems some of these are yet to be realized.
Yes.
So my question is, let's say we see that there's a spiritualized version of the ABC that you listed.
Yeah.
I mean, you wouldn't see a harm in teaching on those subjects.
No, we do.
Because you would see that they're important
Absolutely.
for people to understand the big.
Oh, yes. I
the
think
big
that's right.
picture.
But it's a question of, are you going to lose your job for it? That's where the crunch comes. If you're going to keep them according to the Old Testament, you must not work.
Right.
So if you're going to say, I'm a festival keeper, I say, well, what do you mean by that? I know currently of several people who say they are Sabbath keepers. So I immediately say, well, would you lose your job over it? Oh, no. Well, it's not honest to say that. Let's be a Sabbath keeper or not. We speak about the Day of Atonement and certainly the Feast of Trumpets, which is very likely to be on the 1st of Tishri, I would think.
Mhm.
But I don't worry about Friday sunset. I'm no different really than any other day. And if it were not for 1 Corinthians 16, I'd have more difficulty. I don't think the one in Revelation 1:10 is necessarily a reference to a Sunday. It could be, probably not. Kyriaki imera is difficult. Probably he's transported into the day of the Lord. But I'm unsettled on that.
In the spirit on the day.
But
of the
there's
Lord.
no transference. Nobody says, no, quit keeping the Sabbath and keep Sunday. That's not right.
Yeah.
I see that.
Okay. So your view would be, if I'm understanding you,
Yeah.
it's not that you are against people gathering on a Saturday or worshiping on a Saturday.
No.
Your concern is people having a legalistic view of the Sabbath that does them harm, that puts them outside. It puts them in an awkward cultural situation.
Yes, in this culture. An Old Testament view, literally. There's no such thing as partial Sabbath keeping. If you're going to go by the Bible and say every jot and tittle, then you must do it honestly, including the festivals and the new moons. My concern also is, what impression are you making on your neighbor? It may be very well for you to keep the new moons, and we know people who do it. I also have enough history to tell you there are people who kept the new moons and the tassels who are not even believers now. That doesn't prove anything in your case, because you're much too sensible. But I've seen people go out of Paul and out of Jesus eventually. So Paul is the problem in Colossians 2, really. Problem. There's also Romans 14. It's hard for me to believe that Paul, who says, I'm convinced that nothing is unclean of itself unless you think it is, everything is clean. I mean, Paul, are you that difficult? You're telling me you're enforcing Leviticus 11 with clarity? It's not clear to me. When he says, I'm against circumcision, he says this clearly: if I were teaching circumcision, why am I being persecuted?
Yeah.
You tell me he's not. If you get that clear, well, what else are you not teaching? If you get circumcised, you're going to have to keep that whole law in the letter. I wouldn't do it.
For justification, right? I've looked at several of those verses where Paul is warning people against the use of the law.
Yes.
And it almost seems, to me, it seems like very often he's warning them of thinking that it's going to justify them.
Yeah. Well, justify is being right with God and not wrong. That's all that.
Yeah, right. Which
obedience is very key.
For a Christian, we're going to say that Jesus' whole mission is to justify us.
By believing in the gospel of the King and obeying Jesus. So we use Hebrews 5:9. Nobody else does. Salvation is given to those who obey Jesus. Shut up, sit down, and don't argue. And so the first command of Jesus is repent and believe in the kingdom. Nobody does it. I'm not trying to be some Armstrong character. Believe me, I've seen that. But it's a fact that Billy Graham doesn't do that.
Yeah. So I'm with you. So let me layer this on then. It seems like then there is this ongoing process of, I'm going to use the word sanctification. I know there's a whole argument between justification and sanctification, but there's this ongoing process of us becoming something new.
Of course.
That seems to me that's where the law is really helpful, or Torah instruction is really helpful.
Oh, instruction is most important.
So I've always seen it rather than like a bifurcation of grace or law, but rather there's this covering that Christ does that justifies us when we respond to it, and then it's in understanding and pursuing God's teaching. I think of Psalm, is it 119, that where David or the psalmist he talks about how great God's instruction and law is.
Yes, I believe that with a passion, but be careful with law. Paul says, I, Paul, am not under Torah, but I'm under the law of God, which is, he says that. I, Paul, am personally not under Torah, but I'm under God's law, namely the Torah of Messiah. That's a wonderful distinction.
Yeah. So do you hear him saying there that what he means is under in the sense of judgment, that I'm no longer judged under the law? Does he mean that he's escaped from obedience to law, or does he mean he's escaped from judgment and condemnation because of the law?
Well, that's an Armstrongism. It doesn't say I'm not under the penalty of the law. That was a lie, frankly, that Armstrong put out all the time. When we got to Galatians, which we didn't do, I know because I sat through the class, we couldn't do Galatians. We did it in 10 minutes with Meredith. We couldn't handle it. It screams at us. No, he says, I'm not under law, but I am within the law of Messiah. So that's a huge distinction. There's a Torah of Messiah, which we must keep, and there's a Torah of Moses in the letter, which we shouldn't keep.
Okay. So you would say the spiritual version of any given direction is appropriate to a Christian believer?
Oh, absolutely. Obedience is everything.
Okay.
We get salvation by obeying Jesus. Hebrews 5:9, Hebrews 5:9, Hebrews 5:9. What will bring this together will be the obedience of faith, the obedience of faith. Nobody uses the phrase, Romans 1, framing, Romans 16, the obedience of faith. You can't have faith without obedience. You cannot have obedience without faith.
Okay.
Which Torah are we talking about? Here I'll add something. Even the rabbis said the following. They said, when the Messiah comes, the Messiah's Torah will be as if the Torah of Moses was nothing. So they're living in hope of something greater. And I think Paul is the one bringing that in. That's the best I can do with it.
Okay.
But, and you could do Romans 12. You could say some people think one day is more important than another. Let them do it. Let every man be fully satisfied, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, look at that one. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. The Torah which a man learns in this world, all the Bible Torah, is vanity compared with the Torah of Messiah. That's a Pauline phrase too.
Where does this particular piece of Midrash, does that date pre-Jesus, post-Jesus?
The Midrash
this is AD. AD apostolic, as early as apostolic, but it's hard to date these things.
Hard to date, exactly.
Sure.
You also have the Midrash Koheleth 6, Anthony. The Rabbi Hezekiah said in the name of another rabbi, all the Torah which you learn in this world is vanity compared with the Torah in the world to come.
That's interesting.
For in this world a man learns and forgets, but as for the time to come, what is written there, and interestingly, Jeremiah 31, I will put my law in their inward parts. So let's talk a little bit about the Messianic age, Anthony.
Yeah, we agree on all of that.
So the rabbis did talk about, although it's difficult with the rabbis, it's the old joke, right? You put 3 rabbis in a room, they come out with 4 different perspectives.
Right.
But there is a stream of thought in BC with Qumran. The Qumran community had the teacher of righteousness.
Yeah.
It says in the Dead Sea Scrolls coming along with the new Torah as well. So you got BC, you got early apostolic age. So there is a stream of thought within Judaism that the Messiah would either revise, renew, or just give us a new Torah.
Yeah, and that's interesting background. It's not biblical strictly, but when Paul says, if you get circumcised, don't do it, clearly. He's against it. I don't think he's saying only to Jews there, or to Gentiles, rather. Jim Tabor comes in strong for this point. Jim Tabor was the brightest thing that Armstrong ever produced. Jim Tabor, he's now not really a believer, but he says in his book, he says, the argument that Paul was only talking to Gentiles there is just not right. Paul is very confusing. Okay, I know when I'm talking to you people, I tell you, every one of you, if you get circumcised, you're going to have to keep the whole law. Don't do it. Oh, well, he's only talking to Gentiles there. That's just too difficult for me.
Yeah.
So something radical, Paul is very radical in that book. So I think you'd have to keep the new moons conscientiously if you're going to insist on Sabbath keeping. You're not really. You must insist on the new moons. There's no difference in the shadow, apparently, in Paul.
Can you comment, Anthony and Brandon, if you want, on Romans 7? Someone brought up in our last church meeting. So Paul says, "Do you not know, brothers and sisters, I'm speaking to those who know the law."
Mm.
And then he goes on to tell us the analogy between a husband and a wife. And under
Yes, right.
Judaism, under the Torah, when the spouse died,
Mm.
the marriage was annulled, obviously. So he makes that comparison with those who know the law. Now, is the law here Torah behind this?
Yeah.
So he's
Almost, yeah.
speaking to Jews,
Oh, yes.
especially in this passage.
Mm. Well, that's what he says. The Jews know about that, yeah. Some radical change, isn't it? Even stronger is the Hagar episode. Sarah is freedom and Hagar is bondage. And he's comparing that to the law. I think in the letter, the distinction I'm trying to make is between the spirit and the letter. That takes in beautifully Jesus' statement. I'm not abolishing a jot or tittle of the law. Yes, but you mean, of course, in the spirit, because you patently abolished a whole lot of laws in the letter. You changed the divorce rule.
Well, that's verse 6 there. By now, but now, by dying to what was bound us, we have been released from the law so that we serve in the way of the Spirit and not in the old way of the written code.
That's right.
Yeah, so we still serve.
Absolutely. Torah in its new form.
Yeah. So I've always honestly, this is maybe a misunderstanding of the Armstrong thing, but the idea was that we certainly were trying to. The spirit of the law was really important. I mean, at least in my little part of the world, that was absolutely key. Good. That it wasn't just kick your feet up on Saturday and don't move so that you don't commit some kind of sin. It was there's an active turning towards God that's occurring. That's making this day meaningful and important, and a symbol of the coming kingdom and all that. What I hear you is saying is that doesn't bother you.
No, not at all.
Oh, did we lose sound?
Let's see.
Yeah, Anthony, we lost your sound. Did you flick your maybe your
mute button?
Your little switch there. There you go.
Is that on?
Yep, that's the mute button.
Colossians 2 is final for me. I have a statement from Henry Alford. Doesn't get everything right, but he's very pre-mill. Henry Alford, one of the great Church of England commentators. When you read everything in every language, it doesn't mean you're right. But he has, on Colossians 2, he has some statement about any argument that Paul is only talking about things that happen on the days and not the days themselves, just fails. I would have to say that to Jesus right, Dave. But come on, Paul is too difficult. I'm sorry. I cannot do Paul. I'll have to admit, it's beyond me, because when you say that these days are shadows, negatively contrasted with the body who has come, Messiah, the risen Messiah, I think Jesus is my Sabbath, holy day and everything else, but it doesn't mean I'm going to forget about the calendar as God's plan. I talk about that too. That's the best I can do. I mean, God knows our hearts, at least. When you work at this for 60 years, I had no pressure. See, people say, well, you had to get away from Sabbath where you were teaching. No, not at all. Atlanta Bible College is very free. It allows every possible view. They wouldn't have let me teach the Sabbath maybe vigorously, but I could have been a Sabbath keeper, holy day keeper, new moon keeper, all of that very well. I'm not. So that's where we are today, but one needs time, prayer and whatever, you know. Maybe you'll come up with something else too.
Well, that's actually really helpful. Let me turn. So we've sort of done a look at the Sabbath, negative sense, if it's a shadow or if it's a letter of the law thing.
Right.
And maybe you and I are sort of, or if I'm understanding you, that there's this. You think there's a spiritualized version of that potentially is appropriate for people, whether it's day to day or even if it's just that they set time out to do this, that wouldn't necessarily bother you.
Not at all. Sunday will do very well for me. It doesn't matter to me, but it's nice to have a day of rest. I think absolutely.
So that leads me to my next question, which is, so it bothers me in unintentionally in studying the history of the doctrine of the Trinity and its development. You run into discussions about days of worship, and some pretty ugly anti-Jewish sentiment from early fathers, Justin Martyr and others.
Yes.
What do you say to the concern that Sunday isn't neutral ground, that there's like a pagan syncretism that's happening between the early church and Gentile converts, and they're trying to figure out how do we work this together. And I don't want to harp on Constantine, because obviously there's a lot of history before him. But
that Justin Martyr is meeting on Sunday. It's a falsehood to say the Catholics introduced that. That's just wrong.
Yeah.
They like to claim that. They like to say, look, we changed the Sabbath. That's just wrong, because they're meeting on the first day of the week in Justin's time, much earlier than the Catholics.
Yeah. What worries me about that is the reasons that he gives for why they're meeting on the first day of the week, and others. Because a lot of times it's because we sure don't want to be Jewish.
Right.
And so that's a concern for me. I'm worried that if I were to participate on Sunday, it's not a neutral day. I mean, in some sense, a Bible study on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday night, I'm there, right? Let's all get together and we'll eat fried chicken and we'll study our Bibles. And but Sunday seems to have a significant meaning for extra Christian believers.
So Brandon, you don't do Christmas either, and other things that are paganized like that?
Yeah. Anything that I would see as sort of a religious syncretism.
Yeah. Really? We don't either. We don't do Halloween. We don't do Christmas.
It bothers me. And I like I said, I wouldn't necessarily cast judgment on anybody, but for me, I know the origins of some of these things, and
absolutely.
I don't want anything to do it. So I have an aversion to Sunday for that reason.
Oh, yes. Well, I would too, if I could show historically that it has no roots in the New Testament, but I'm still stuck with, why am I making a fuss about a shadow?
Well, the names of the days have pagan origins.
All of them.
So if you congregate on Saturday, you're keeping Saturn's Day. If you congregate on Monday, you're keeping Mars Day, I think. So we're stuck, right? If we get two.
I would need some explanation of 1 Corinthians 16. Every single Sunday, collect your money so there are no collections when I come.
Yeah.
Some sort of joint activities happening there every week.
Yeah.
Every day of the week. Not one Sunday. The Greek is clear. Every single Sunday, collect your money in some way. You're doing something by way of activity on every Sunday. I don't know why that would be.
Right. And I've seen pushback on this, and maybe you can even explain this alternative view better than I can, but I've seen pushback on that the idea was the first day of the week was just an appropriate time for them to do that, because they're coming off of a Sabbath. They need to sort aside, that it's not necessarily an explicit claim that since you're together, you might as well set aside things. It sounds like they were maybe even setting them aside
on Saturday. Since you're together on Saturday, is that
on the first day of the week?
Okay, why would they be together on the first day of the week?
Does it say that?
Oh yes, every single Sunday.
Does it say they're together, or does it say it says set aside them?
It says what? Yeah, store up your money, doesn't it?
On the first day of the week, each of you should set aside, save whatever can afford.
Yes.
So that collections will not be going on when I come.
Yes. So you're putting it in a central position of some sort, aren't you?
I mean, I don't see it saying that they were gathering on that day in that passage.
Well, no, okay, it doesn't exactly say gathering, but it seems to say that he then says, so there'll be no collections when I come. So the money has already arrived at a centralized point on every Sunday.
Yeah, it's implying, I think, Brandon, that Christians are getting together on the first day of the week. And
something's happening.
There's this collection going on.
Yeah, I agree. I agree, but it's balancing difficulties then. If I'm going to insist on Sabbath keeping in a biblical way, I'm going to have to do it. And certainly the holy days, I'm going to have to do it. Now we're back under the Armstrong thing and the new moons. It's a balance. This is far more difficult than the difficulty of Sunday, if you like.
Also, you have, I know you have reservations. You can voice them here, Brandon, about Acts 20, verse 7.
What about that one? Yeah.
They're breaking bread on the first day of the week. Why?
Why are they doing that?
Yeah. So again, I'm just trying to represent the counterpoints that I've read. So the question is, first off, is it actually occurring on like the beginning of the first day? So it's happening Saturday night, right? So they, yeah, right. So the question is, was that occurring like Sunday evening or Saturday evening? Because
I don't think the first day of the week is ever Saturday. First day of the week, and he goes on preaching till midnight on that Sunday and then leaves on Monday, I would think. How do we know that that's Saturday evening?
So like I said, I've read a couple of different scholars that have argued that you could read it, that it's either, you could read it as either Saturday night that they're eating, but if I understand, doesn't it also say that the day that he left and he so after the poor guy falls out the window because
go ahead,
talked too late and the guy falls out the window because he fell asleep.
Oh, absolutely. So he goes on preaching late into whatever evening that was. I don't think the first day of the week could possibly mean Saturday evening.
Well, I mean, after sundown Saturday night would be now the first day, right?
Okay.
So that was one argument, and then the second was whether breaking bread was just standard eating together, or if it was some kind of Eucharistic view, which I get both sides of that argument. I think.
There's another point there too. He leaves on the first day of the week. Okay, on the first day of the week they come to the tomb. What day was that? You're not doing the 3 days and 3 nights thing, or maybe you are.
Oh, like a Wednesday night burial, you mean?
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I'm looking at. Yeah, I've been in conversation with Carlos.
Oh, okay.
About that too.
Well, that's very difficult because Luke 24:21 says today, Sunday, is the third day since the crucifixion event.
Yeah, because it's the guys walking along the road and they're saying it's the third day.
On Sunday.
Yeah, this is the third day since.
Yes. Now you work that for Wednesday, it's going to be hard for you.
Yeah. So, as I understand, even that passage.
Yes.
Don't those guys say that they're expecting him to rise on the third day?
Absolutely, they are.
See, that's weird to me because I don't know that were any of them expecting him to rise on the third day. I've always wondered on that passage.
Well, they've got Hosea in their background. Paul mentions it. You've got, the third day in Hosea, and they seem to go back to that. Paul speaks about the third day according to the scriptures, so he's got a scripture in mind at least. Today, Sunday, is the third day. We were expecting that. They must have got background information there.
Of course, Paul's got the benefit of hindsight, right? He wasn't there on the third day wondering if he was going to be risen. He's looking back now because he was a later convert.
Oh, absolutely. Well, they find it in Hosea. I don't know what the disciples had been taught about that. All they know is today is the third day, and we were thinking he would be risen on the third day. Where they got that from, I don't no idea. It's balancing the difficulties, because if I'm going to go back to the Sabbath literally, I'm going to have to do it literally. I'm going to have to counsel people to lose their jobs for the feast. I mean, flat out.
Yeah.
It's dishonest for me to say you can keep the feast, but if you have to work, you work. That's just dishonest. That's worse. You either do it or you don't, and you've got to explain why shadow means all three together. That doesn't sound to me like frightfully important.
Okay, so what do you make of I've heard people, and I've read that passage and looked at it and say, okay, how would I see this if Paul was saying these things are a shadow, but they're now fulfilled. Like there's in Christ, they're a new thing. I mean, you keep talking about how it's contrasted negatively. Is that based on the grammar?
Oh yes, absolutely. The there, which Armstrong didn't touch, and they don't. The there is contrastive there. These things are only, or we won't do what the NIV says and put merely. That would be adding. We won't do that. But we've got a negative there. The weekly Sabbath is a single shadow of what was to come. But, contrary-wise, on the other hand, the substance is Messiah. That contrast is very important.
So, like, when I look at this, I've looked at multiple translations, and it says something along those lines: "Don't let anyone judge you in regard to food or drink." And
or
I've seen some where does it say or? Because this translation is very different in different places, and in some cases it looks like it says, "Don't let them judge you like in regard to food and drink."
Yes.
during these feasts.
Oh no.
Like the way that you're feasting.
No, that's not at all. So because you've got order there, and we can read it, we can sort that out. King James is not the best, I'm sure, ever. NIV and is not very good. NASV tends to be better, but if we read it in 2:16, we have the following: "Don't let anyone make rules for you in regard to eating and drinking, or separate category about customs, festivals, that is, new moon celebrations, or Sabbath." He's got days, that's wrong. Weekly Sabbath is singular. They're separate categories, but these days are a shadow. A single shadow, skia, which the relative pronoun refers back to the shadow there, which the days just mentioned are a single shadow of things to come. But on the other hand, the substance is Messiah. Some sort of contrast. I don't find that Armstrong people ever dealt with the detail of some of the Greek there.
Sure. Okay, so what Paul is saying there then is to converts, don't let Jewish Christians or non-Jewish or non-Christian Jews judge you and demand that you submit to food laws or any of the dates. That's how you read that.
That's how I read it, yes. Okay. Why? Because that shadow, which is the calendar, is a shadow. Why would I want to be under the shadow when the Messiah, who is the body reflecting that shadow, has come? That's the difficult part.
So must there be a dichotomy between those two things? Can we appropriately rank them? Is there a chance Paul is appropriately ranking them that these things are absolutely the shadow of the thing that we are oriented towards, and so they're helpful in that they're the outline of him.
Yes, but the contrast is there, the conjunction. But on the other hand, contrary-wise, opposite to the shadow comes the body. And you've got that in Hebrews twice, you know that. The shadow is a negative thing compared with the law. Is the law compared with what is now. So all you can do in the Bible is look up the passages that are parallel. And the shadow one comes twice in Hebrews, chapter 8 and chapter 10. It's both cases negative, contrasted with the high priest who is functioning, I think. I don't know what else you can do with that.
So you can spiritualize them and put both the Sabbath, all three of those ABC.
Yes.
You can spiritualize them and say they were for instruction. They weren't bad.
They are a shadow. They are a shadow, as Adam is a type. That's what they are. That's what they are, a shadow. Indistinguishable. You cannot argue for one over the other. That's where the SDAs go wrong.
Yeah, because
they say 10,000 of them, 10 million of them, 23 million, I get right. 23 million of them say, oh, wait a minute. Paul is talking about the weekly Sabbath. No, he's talking only about the annual Sabbaths and the holy days and the annual Sabbaths.
Yeah, it's got to be all
that shows. Sometimes, by the way, if you look at the contrary arguments, you see where it falls apart.
Yeah.
What about
don't forget 23 million SDAs, good people, sleep of the dead. Even their leader agreed with me when I wrote to him. He said, obviously, we're talking about all three types. That's a very big sign that all is not well with the argumentation, I think.
What about Galatians 4? We don't often bring this in, but
4:10, right?
4, it says the same, the trio. And then verse 11, I'm concerned that all I did for you has been wasted. So, so why would Paul be, so if it's not a negative contrast in Colossians 2, why would Paul here be so negative about the trio in verse 11?
At 4:10, we used to say that's pagan holidays. Well, the enemies in Galatians were Jews. We all knew that. So why would these Jews be telling them to keep pagan holidays?
So here the trio is clearly in verse 11.
Jewish in background.
Negative. There's a negative tone to Paul, who's a former Pharisee, saying, I'm wasting my time with this. You're observing the trio.
So, but I've heard this framed in the context of verse 8, where he says, formerly when you did not know God, you were slave to those who by nature are not gods. To argue that's what verse 10 is referring to, that their previous pagan. Yeah, obviously this is an Armstrong argument.
Yes.
But But how do you read that? Because it certainly looks like he's talking to people that they used to be slaves to other gods.
Absolutely. But who is the enemies here? Who's working to get them in line? Jews. For Paul, then, keeping the holy days is no more value than keeping those pagan days. It's all gone for him. The enemies are Jews here. So these Gentiles obviously were keeping pagan days before, but now you're not doing that. Why are you keeping the Jewish days? That seems to be, why are you worrying about circumcision? That's a Jewish influence, isn't it? What Jews they wouldn't be keeping or teaching pagan days. All of that is rather speculative. I hope our salvation doesn't depend on getting that right.
Yeah, I mean, I just, if I'm, and hopefully I'm not missing your point, but I mean, as I look at verse 8, it doesn't look, I don't see him changing the subject of who he's talking to.
No.
It looks like he's talking to the same people that were enslaved by so-called gods of this world.
Oh, absolutely.
Are those the same people that he's complaining about them falling back into old,
I don't think he says falling back. Does he say falling back into them?
No, that's my language.
Okay.
Do you wish to be enslaved by them all over again? Yes. You're observing special days and months.
The so-called gods of this world. Yes. Well, Jews also were seduced into idolatry, were they not? So, but the language here of being an heir and so on, but now that you have come to know God, or rather to be known by God, how can you go back to those useless and worthless rules?
Yes. Therefore, the calendar that the Jews are imposing is no more value than the pagan holidays. I think he's terribly radical, but I would have to have Galatians, you see, the whole of Galatians. If that's all I had in Galatians, but in the 5th chapter, I've got, for goodness sake, he says, I'm not teaching the whole law. I can't get people to tell me, what's this whole law which you mustn't keep? I can't get anybody to say. And if I were still preaching circumcision, which I am not, what? Why aren't you preaching circumcision, Paul? It's required under the Torah for everybody, Jew and Gentile.
Right.
But he's not doing it. And it's making the Jews mad, by the way.
Right.
So Brendan, can I ask you about the Armstrong view here? So let's say this is they taught or teach that this is a Galatians 4 to Gentiles, right?
Yeah.
Let's say that's the premise.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So what were the special days, months, seasons, and years? Like what Gentile?
Which ones would I be referring to?
Yeah.
So I see that in the context of verse 8 as being whatever false gods they were a part of.
On those special days and months, seasons, and years.
Yeah, I mean there were pagan calendars too.
Oh yes,
right.
That's my understanding of it. And,
I see that. The problem is that the enemy seem to be Jews, though. You now, under the influence of Judaism, which wants to get you circumcised and keep the law, are keeping these days. That's strange if they were not Jewish holy days. But I don't think that's decisive, I grant you. I think Colossians 2 is.
And would Paul know about pagan calendars?
Oh, sure he would. Why not?
The special days.
I mean, if they were falling back into going to old rituals, I'm sure that would be part of what he'd been told that he had to write back about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can we go to chapter 5 where you guys were just talking about?
Yes, that's the one.
What verse?
Where you were saying
3 and 11.
Verse 3.
Yep.
That I declared every man who lets, I think I'm in the NIV, but anyway.
Fine, it'll do. That's fine.
It's just the first thing that came up with Google. So again, I declare to every man who lets himself be circumcised that he's obligated to the whole law, obey the whole law.
Yeah, what's that? Whole law.
Verse 4 is, you who are trying to be justified by the law have been alienated from Christ. So my question is the problem not the being committed to the law, but thinking that being committed to the law, you could be justified through it?
Well, but you are committed. You are justified by obedience. This is a tricky argument for me. What do you, let's say you want to do all these days. Well, I'm not doing it to be justified. What?
Certainly not, right.
Well, what else is there? To be justified is to be
Yeah,
right with God. End of story. You're right with God or wrong with God, so you do everything to be right with God.
right. So that, which is good, but we
Yeah.
also have to become like him too, right?
Oh,
So
yes.
that's where I would argue that
Mhm.
the law is valuable. So I mean, as I'm looking at this, I see it saying that you think you're going to be justified by your obedience to the law. Just because the law doesn't justify you doesn't mean it doesn't have other purposes.
But the law does justify you. Obedience to the law of Jesus gives you salvation. There's a model here in the public mind, I think, about justification. It simply means being right with God. Abraham believed God and obeyed him, right? And that was justification and sanctification, the whole process, and it then goes forward. So I don't see that distinction exactly. Why would you keep the law after getting baptized, for example, but not at baptism? Would you
Well,
begin to
okay,
keep
this
the
is one of the questions I want to ask, is
Yeah.
we didn't really carefully start with the definition of terms, and maybe you can help
Yeah.
me with this.
Yeah.
So as I understand it, the word Torah
Yeah.
means, I mean, if I just look it up
Yeah.
in a lexicon or something,
Mm.
it can mean law or instruction or
Mm.
teaching.
Totally.
It doesn't have to just be like boundaries on which you can't step over, like a law is. It can also be seen as
Oh.
instruction that's beneficial
It's
to you.
instruction. It is instruction, absolutely. Teaching. It has a secondary meaning as principle.
Okay.
Principle of faith. The Torah of faith. It has any lexicon, Greek lexicon will show you that carefully, very easily. It has a secondary meaning, meaning principle, as distinct from its first meaning, which is exactly what you said. It's instruction. It's, here, kid, do what I say. A father
Yeah.
tells the children what to do. But the distinction I'm making is between the Torah of Moses, which don't you go there, please don't do it, and the Torah of Messiah, which is where you absolutely must be. That distinction.
So I keep thinking of all these verses that talk about the, either in Timothy where all the scripture is good for all the things it's good for.
It is.
Or
Yes.
or my man Solomon or David who
Yes.
who are turning to God's teaching, and some use that instead of law because law has this negative connotation.
Yes.
Certainly the teaching is not abolished, it's being further explained, or we're
Yes.
there seems to me there's such a dichotomy in people's mind. I think you're right.
Yes.
And maybe this is just from Luther or Calvin or somebody, where there's either law or grace. There's either obedience, it's all to do with soteriology. What is it that gets you saved? Is it your obedience or is it God's activity?
Right.
It seems like there's a way to sort that out where all the teaching is still valuable and good.
You start with circumcision. Tell me, what sort of a change is it from cutting the foreskin to being circumcised the heart? I would say totally different. But it's still circumcision, and circumcision of the heart exists in the Old Testament too.
Yeah,
that's where I start, because it's a huge difference, right? What I want to know is, what is this whole law that Paul is against? Not just circumcision.
Yeah, me too, because it certainly can't be moral law included in teaching, right?
The answer is calendar and food laws.
So you think, okay, so that's what I'm going to ask you. So you would take, if we took the whole body of the Old Testament and all the commands, you would sort them between, this is one of the questions I ask you, because I've heard people argue there are different sort of categories of law, and there are civil law and moral law, and there's law that was unique to this covenant or that covenant. Would you divvy them up?
Yeah, but I base this on the distinction I'm making on the basis of circumcision. I know full well that everybody, Jew and Gentile, must be circumcised to keep the Passover. Is that clear? Now, nobody has to be circumcised.
Right.
All right. So that's very clear. It's from not using a knife to cut the foreskin to being circumcised. That's huge. Therefore, Paul says, I, Paul, am not under Torah, but I'm within the Torah of Messiah. That distinction, if that doesn't pervade everything, I don't know what does.
So he uses that quote's really interesting. If you were quoting that directly, it says he's not under, he's within.
Yes, within the Torah of Messiah. I'm not under the law, meaning the law of Moses. What I think God doesn't want is that everybody has to become a Jew to be a Christian. That is to rebuild the middle war of partition that kept us all apart. We don't want that.
This third, it's strange. to me, it doesn't seem like it's an either or. It seems like there's got to be this carrying over of the good teaching of the old covenant.
Absolutely.
Giving a fullness of it. And
Yes.
it's, I think where Jesus goes through and says it's
Yes.
not just murder, it's don't hate.
That's right.
Don't commit adultery, don't lust.
That's right.
And he goes through the whole list. Wouldn't there be that equivalent for every command?
Absolutely.
Torah, right?
Yes, but in a way, you just talked yourself out of literal Sabbath keeping. For every command, you go into a new key. You know, if you're a musician, when you modulate into a higher key, you get this lifted feeling. Try that with every single law. The difference between the Torah of Messiah, that nobody talks about, and the Torah of Moses. What about the schoolmaster that only went until Christ, and now you're not under that? What is that schoolmaster law?
Can I jump in here quick? Pastor Robin Todd has a couple of comments here.
Okay.
Don't we have to take into consideration the context of Colossians 2? Ephesians 2 makes it clear. The conversation is about the law of commandments, ordinances, which were an enmity or enemy, which Jesus put to death. Paul is saying that if you insist on keeping Torah of the Jews to be right with God, you have fallen from grace. This is what circumcision stands for, isn't it?
Yes.
As Anthony says, we need to keep Torah of Christ, which is not related to the old covenant, 2 Corinthians 3. Do you want to go to 2 Corinthians?
Yeah.
Or were you flipping something else, Anthony?
Well, I was going to think of the one where Paul says that Paul, is not under Torah, but he is within the Torah of Messiah. There's a huge distinction there. That distinction is critical. But that one that Robin brings up is parallel to Colossians, by the way, written at the same time. Don't go back to those law of dogmas, what Paul calls the works of the law, by the way. The works of the law, he's not talking about adultery, you could do what you like. No, of course not. Right. If you want to call that the moral law, I don't like those terms because they're not strictly biblical, but the difference committing adultery and not even lusting is at a different level than not eating pork, I think. Of course, I'm living this too, and I may be entirely wrong. I still have to listen carefully to what you're saying. But for me, life became life when we got out of Armstrong. I hate to say that.
Don't you think that the weight of thinking that keeping the law is what keeps you right with God, that's the way that people felt? And I'm with you. I totally agree. I think that they missed. I'm going to speak for myself. I shouldn't.
Yeah, go ahead.
We can, because I shouldn't speak for other people. There were 100,000 people that held some version of these views.
You're right.
So I shouldn't speak for others. But the idea, if you miss Jesus as removing the penalty of the law, then the law scares the living Jesus out of you, right? If you hold that, then the law doesn't. I was reading the deal about the law being a curse, and I was thinking, well, it's a curse. The teaching can't be a curse. That's got to be good. These commands are not. I was thinking of Justin Martyr talking about that they were given to the Jews like to punish them, because they're just bad, and God knew they were going to be bad, and so He had to give them these burdensome laws and this burdensome teaching. I can't see it that way. The psalmist didn't see it that way, certainly. Some
of it apparently in Acts 10:15, Peter himself says the Torah was a burden. You know that text, don't you?
So let me ask you this: do you think that are they referring to? I've always been under the impression there's accretions that had happened over from the time of the giving of the law till their time, and that there's some of that's what Jesus is having to undo. He's having to roll back sort of the Pharisaic and other accretion.
Oh, of course, that's a major thing. He's complaining about extra biblical laws. They'd made it a nightmare. But in Acts 15:10, Peter actually says the Torah itself was a burden, which we couldn't bear.
So you don't think he's referring to, yes, gotcha. Because he's talking about we couldn't bear it to save ourselves. We couldn't, gotcha. We couldn't keep it. Jesus could, right?
Well, he keeps it in the spirit. That's the whole point. Jesus is obviously doing something with the law, going beyond the letter. The schoolmaster you've looked at, right? That schoolmaster law was added because of transgressions until the Messiah came. Then it was no longer.
Yeah, by the way, that's a reference I'm not familiar with. I don't know what.
Oh, yeah. That's the whole key to Galatians, one of the keys.
Okay.
It was a schoolmaster, it's a custodial guide. It was added to the existing Torah until Messiah, only until. Now that we don't need a custodial guide to take us to school, we're mature enough then we're not under that, whatever that law is. That's the whole law that Paul says don't keep, I think.
Yeah,
That's very key. Nobody will dare tell me, what is this? Don't get circumcised. If you do, you're going to have to obey the whole law.
In order to be justified?
That's the whole thing, to be right with God.
Yeah, but you could try to keep the whole law for other purposes, and it doesn't seem like it's a problem. Right?
Why would you do it?
To become more holy, to be more, to build in character, to create character, to be.
Well, it's enough to be obeying God, Jesus.
Why do you want to do
that's what you have to do?
But I mean, that's the way I've always thought. Like, how can I know how to love?
Yeah.
How can I fulfill the commands of Jesus if I don't have the Torah to reference to teach me what it is to love somebody?
You do have the Torah of Messiah. Paul says that in Galatians, doesn't he?
Yeah, 3:24. The law was our guardian until Messiah came,
right?
So that we could then be made right by believing Jesus.
Yeah.
Believing Jesus, meaning the law of Jesus, Anthony?
Oh, sure. Believing everything Jesus says and commands in the Spirit, as developed by Paul. Yeah, that's good enough for me. What else do I need? I don't know what I would gain by keeping the new moons. Why is that better?
So, okay, let me make a quick case for that. It's best because I've never done that, but by my understanding, the whole idea with the new moons is you're in line with the calendar as they saw it. So your year's beginning with their year. You're timed up for the holy day calendar so that you're oriented to that. And like I said, I'm not a new moon keeper. I'm just new to that, even that.
Right. Right.
But I mean, that's the idea, right? It was important because without that, you couldn't count correctly to get to the next holy days.
That's true. Well, why would you keep the holidays? Because they're linked. They're exactly the same as the Sabbath and the holy day. I want to know, why in the world would you keep the holy days and lose your job? Because that's what you have to do.
Yeah, so I wouldn't hesitate to do that. I mean, I did. I mean, I never lost my job for it, but I mean,
you could. You could have. People did. I saw them lose their jobs in England at 4 o'clock.
My grandparents my family did. There were jobs we couldn't do. There were things we couldn't participate. You know, good luck being on the football team, right?
Yes.
And playing on Friday nights.
Of course.
There are things to sacrifice, and if it's
yes,
if it's asked,
yes, I
don't think there's any price that's too high.
Amen.
The question is it asked, which I'm coming back to.
That's very important, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's what I'm against. I'm against obligatory Sabbath keeping or holy days or new moons.
Sure.
Because I think it erects the wall between the Jew and the Gentile, the dogmas of what Paul calls the works of the law, which has nothing to do with not committing adultery. James Dunn should be read on. James Dunn, the scholar, should have a look at what he says. It's those things that divided the Jew from the Gentile. I think that's been broken down. It seems to work for us, but that's not an argument at all. Maybe we're just deceived,
Well, I mean, in this culture, I would say this: if I lived in Israel, it would probably be a lot easier to to do it the other way.
Yes,
that worries me. I don't want to just submit to the culture.
No.
Particularly if. Okay, so let me go back to the evidence that we have for worshiping on an alternative day.
Yes.
Let's say there was no evidence at all for worshiping on an alternative day, which means that they were no longer under penalty if in the way they kept the Sabbath. So they kept it, and if they wanted to go work on Friday night, they went and worked on Friday night.
Yeah.
And if they had something to do on Saturday, they had to pull their oxen out of the hole. They went and did that.
Yeah.
The evidence so far for worshiping on an alternative day is Acts 20, verse 7. The resurrection appearances occurring on the first day.
Yeah.
And then everything else is sort of anti old covenant. It's contrasting the old covenant with new.
Yes.
Right? Are there other arguments that I should consider for a Sunday worship?
I think so. 1 Corinthians. Well, we mentioned 1 Corinthians. Every that's a possible indication. Okay. However, let me ask you about the Passover.
Okay.
How often are you going to keep it? Every year, once. Armstrong would say once a year.
Yeah. So I wouldn't participate in communion.
Okay.
Because I take those passages where they're eating and drinking to literally be eating and drinking in the New Testament, and I take Christ to be establishing a new understanding of the Passover, not establishing a.
But it's once a year, you're saying.
Yeah, not a Eucharistic kind of communion.
Okay. Well, the problem with that is that in 1 Corinthians, Paul says, when you come together in church once a year, you're not keeping, possibly, it's a bit of a stretch. When you come together to meet in church, you're not keeping the Lord's Supper, but you should be. So you're going to have to explain that. Then you're going to also explain, let us be keeping the feast. Armstrong did not know anything about Greek verbs, but let's be continuously keeping it with the unleavened bread of truth. That's spiritualizing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And you're keeping the feast all the time, every day, not let's keep it once a year. I don't think in Corinthians he's saying when you come together in church once a year, you're supposed to be keeping the Lord's Supper. You're not doing it. And then he says further at the end of the letter, another argument, the rest of the stuff I'll fix when I come to see you. Well, he was coming to see them within the year. This is such an urgent thing. It needs to be dealt with right there. You've got to get the Lord's Supper right, but it's not an annual thing. He could wait till the next year. I don't think that's reasonable.
Yeah, my understanding of this, again, I'm sort of trying to present this sort of Sabbatarian the alternative.
Yes, you should.
My understanding is that they would refer to any time that they came together to eat as the Lord's Supper. That any time that they would gather and they would have a meal, that they'd go to Rosie's house or whatever, and they would gather and they would eat. Mm-hmm. And it was not ritualized. It was so in some sense, his admonition that anytime you do this, here's the attitudes that you should have, and here are the mistakes you shouldn't make, seems to make sense to me.
But in 1 Corinthians, is he talking about a meal at any time? He immediately goes into the Lord's Supper event at Passover.
Can we pull the verse up?
Yes. 1 Corinthians, what is it?
Because I need to reference. I don't have it memorized.
Have a look at that one. 1 Corinthians 11, is it, Carlos? I think so.
Yep, 11. 1 Corinthians 11, 18, 20. Yeah. 23, 33. Hold on, I'm just trying to get it up here.
Lord's Supper.
Yeah, there's divisions. Yeah. Okay, here we go. Yeah,
because things I tell you, I don't praise. I'll read from 17. I don't praise you. Your meetings hurt you more than they help you. First, I hear that when you meet together as a church, you are divided. And it's not hard to believe because of your idea that you must have separate groups alone and so on. When you all come together, that's to say in church, not once a year, I think, you're not eating the Lord's Supper, but you should be. You're not eating the Lord's Supper because you're all divided and hungry and drunk and all that stuff.
Yeah.
When you come together in church, in the context, in verse 20, it's not really the Lord's Supper you're eating, but it should be. I say this because when you eat, each one, so on. That sounds to me like a more than annual meeting. And he then goes on to describe what the Lord's Supper is. It happened once, the one time in the year, doesn't it? Passover. It seems to have been spiritualized to be more than once.
Yeah.
How else would we deal with it?
Yeah, I mean, so I would argue that, or I would buy that. I'm not arguing that they didn't gather together, eat, and refer to it as
Lord's Day,
as a worshipful way, and that whenever they do that they should be mindful of how Christ had encouraged them to do it. But I have a hard time. We don't need to get to transubstantiation or anything like that.
No. We're not.
But I mean, I look at this, and as I read it, it seems like just good advice to get people to get along while they're eating dinner together after a worship service or something.
Why does he refer then to the Passover meal that Jesus took in that context? It doesn't seem to be any meal that Jesus.
So
in the night that the Lord died, he took the bread. That's once a year. That's the Passover, obviously.
Yeah, in verse 17, Brandon, your meetings hurt you more than they help you.
Yeah.
So you believe that's just like meeting for Passover. And when you all come together.
I think that's whenever they got together. I mean, I understand that I'm not. I need to do more reading on first century church their activities. But my understanding, it was fairly informal. They met at whoever's house could host them.
Oh, I'm sure.
And it was a communal meal. That's my understanding of it. That later on got more and more ritualized.
Yep.
And
so is the question that you have to have a meal with the communion service, or are you arguing just once a year as a transferred Passover? What are you arguing here?
So I guess I'm arguing against the ultimate, what I would see was a progression from a communal meal, that maybe you would appeal to it as a way of reflecting on that, to it being a ritualized, transubstantiated item.
Oh, no, that's a different. None of us is promoting transubstantiation.
Yeah, but I'm looking at verse 27, which I know I didn't quite answer your question, Carlos. But so then, whoever eats the bread and drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of sinning against. So you're undoing. You're being disrespectful.
Oh, totally. So drunken, you're hungry. The meal is being abused horribly, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's cases where the rich people are eating over here and they're leaving out the poor people and all that stuff. So I don't know. I don't see that as evidence of anything other than trying to have them have good manners, and he's calling them back to their example.
But it's when you come together in church, though. It's not what you're doing at home.
Well, it doesn't say. It says as a church. And
in church means on the occasion of church meeting, because he says, don't you have homes to eat in? That's a different thing. If you cannot do this right, then why don't you eat at home? He's not talking about eating at home. He's when you come together as an ecclesia, as a church meeting, you're not keeping the Lord's Supper, but you should be doing it right. Then he can contrast that with home. If you're not doing this right and you're getting hungry and drunk, why don't you eat at home? That's a different thing.
Right, if you can't handle it here, go do it.
Yes, so it's not at home now.
And it explains why he brings in the remembrance of what Jesus said.
Yeah.
And by the way, Paul wasn't there, so this is obviously information he got from either the apostles or Jesus himself. So you're not, once again, Brandon, you're not arguing for sort of what some Sabbatarians do, a transferred Passover as the Lord's Supper or the Christian Eucharist?
Yeah, that wouldn't be. I wouldn't hold to the view that there's a new instituted formal ceremony that they were a part of.
Yeah, because one of the things we talked about was Exodus 12:48, where you have to be circumcised to eat the Passover meal.
Right.
If it's somehow transferred, as many Sabbatarians argue.
Oh, I see.
Do you follow?
Yeah, I got you. Okay, so you're saying there are Sabbatarians that would argue that that you had to be circumcised because now the Lord's Supper.
Well, no, I'm just pointing to Torah. Yeah. So if we want to be Torah light, but if we want to be real Torah followers, it seems to me that if you're arguing, I'm not saying you are, that the communion, Eucharist, or whatever you want to call it, Lord's Supper is transferred, then it would seem right to be circumcised according to Torah.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, sorry, sorry for the noise here.
All right. Great. If you let us know when you have to go.
No, it's fine.
All right.
Melissa, am I going to be in trouble because I'm not helping clean the dishes? Or am I okay?
Yeah, that's
okay. No, I'm
if you came to us on a Sunday to church, and it happened to be the Sunday when we will keep it, you keep it, that's choice. Month, whatever. Sure. I don't think that you would feel, maybe would you? Well, I can't do this because this is really a Passover.
I would be really uncomfortable. In fact, I've done that. I've been with believers that were doing that, and I either step out or abstain from that.
Even Unitarian believers, Kingdom believers. Okay, so what sort of denomination are you going to be? With that system,
hopefully I'm
you are
just a
going to be
Berean
the
Christian.
only one. You cannot take communion with anybody.
Right.
And you were saying to Jesus, look, I'm the only one that's getting this right. And that's possible. But
Yeah.
I think you need to sit and say to yourself, wait a minute, I'm not sure that all my Unitarian Kingdom people are wrong on this.
Well, I'm not ready to define the bounds of the kingdom.
No. Well, but you're defining the church, though. If you could not take communion with us,
Yeah, the church are the kingdom people,
the
right?
church of the kingdom people, it's only one
Yeah.
church. It's
Yeah.
okay.
There
You
should
have a
be
right to found a denomination, but my point to you is be fully aware that that's what you're doing.
Sure.
If you take that line, you're really saying I'm the only person on the earth that gets this right.
Well, maybe that one doctrine, I might be the only person that gets it right.
But but it's so individual. You couldn't take communion with us, which is saying I'm not part of your church. Sorry. That's
Yeah.
all right. You have a right to do it.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, on this subject, I know we've kind of moved from the subject, which I'm okay with, but yeah, I as I look at that, if I don't see the formalized communion service in the New Testament, which obviously every other Christian in the world does.
Well, I don't know what you mean about formalized. I mean, that's too vague to be.
I mean, I don't think that. I think it was a meal. I think that they got together and that it was just natural to do that.
Well, we would too. We'd have a meal with it. Fine, no argument. We would do that.
Well,
Okay, we'd have a meal as well.
Yeah, I think the meal was it. I think over time. I mean, I'm sure historians that can track this better than me, but how that became the meal turned into the communion service.
We have no objection to a meal, but if we had a meal and a communion service, not just on Passover Day, you would feel that's not my church. I can't fellowship with those people.
Oh, I fellowship with just about everybody. But
you wouldn't know, but you're excommunicating us. Close communion says, I'm not taking this with you. That divides and confuses everybody. Now you have a right to do that, but as long as you are aware of what it is.
I get how controversial not buying into communion is.
So just to be clear,
into the bread and the.
You're saying that there is no communion.
Sorry, what did you say, Carlos?
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, I think I got you now.
Oh, sorry, there must be a lag. Sorry, just to be clear, so this is related to, obviously, the Passover. So are you saying, so you believe that there is no teaching of a communion service to be observed by the church in the New Testament?
Mm-hmm. Except for Passover.
But so you do.
They had a communal meal,
right? But not a. So when Paul here in 1 Corinthians 11 goes into this whole "for I received from the Lord this tradition," as Anthony calls it here. So this is just Paul saying, "Let's just break bread and drink wine in dinner time." Is that?
I would say that as often as he quite literally every meal now is a reflection of him, and in particular when you come together.
I see. And
you come together in church, please note. When you come not at home, expressly not at home, you have to deal with that fact too. When you come together as a church meeting, you're not doing the Lord's Supper. That connects it with the church meeting very much, doesn't it?
But I mean, it was always at somebody's home.
No, this wasn't. It was church. You can eat at home. That's distinct. The eating at home is a distinct issue here.
See verse 22.
It cannot just be homes. Yeah.
So verse 22 there, Brandon. Do you not have your own houses to eat and drink?
Right.
Yes.
So you're saying, so this is at somebody's house, and Paul is simply saying, well, if you're gonna be
drunken,
drunkard, whatever.
Do it at home.
You can do that at your own house. You can get drunk at your own house.
Well,
don't come together and do that.
So Paul is saying it's fine to get drunk in your own house in the privacy of your own house.
Well, no, obviously not.
I mean, I'm not that strongly, but sure, there are.
Well, the implication
also in the context of you're eating before you want to eat first before everyone else. There's a rank thing that's happening, right? So there was a formalized way that they arranged at the table. I mean, as I understand it, that was even a thing, right? The fact that they all ate and there was no rank at the table. Like, as I understand it, the meal itself was quite subversive because they weren't arranged at the table in a formal way. So I mean, as I understand this, yeah, he's advocating for them to have honestly just good manners when they come together as an ecclesia, as an assembly.
Yes.
Okay.
In
and
church,
which
yes.
would be different from if you're just having dinner at home with your family, I
Yes.
guess.
Exactly.
Right, but so do you try and do Passover once a year? Did you say?
When do you keep the Lord's Supper as Jesus said you're supposed to do it?
Yeah, so I would argue that what Jesus is saying is when you keep the Passover,
Yes.
it has this new meaning that it did not have
Right.
before. It was
Okay.
I was symbolized
Yes.
by the Passover. I was
Right.
prophesizing
Yes.
it.
Right.
Now my body and my blood are a part of this thing too.
So you're insisting on the Passover, but that implies all the holy days. You can't distinguish one from the other.
Yeah.
Right. Then your
And you
conscience
gotta be
makes you
circumcised.
must keep all of the holy days faithfully, which means you mustn't go to work on any of those days. But you're not doing that. You're saying you wouldn't do it.
So
That seems inconsistent to me.
no, I do think that we're called to be consistent. No, I agree with you, and I've lived that way. I've fallen. Okay, so this is just
Okay.
this is by having feet of clay, and there's a difference between what I'm trying to figure out what I think is right and
Yes. What I actually do.
But I would say if you hold this view, I totally agree with you that yes, you would sacrifice, you would find ways to set aside time,
Yes.
You would
you
get
figure out how to try and fit it in your life. And if there are things that didn't work that way, then so be it. There are prices that you pay for that. Because
Okay, let me make my point about denominations again. You have a right to do this. But please note that you are against all of your Adventist Unitarian friends. They're all wrong. Because none of them have seen this at all. We who came out of it, we got it wrong, and that you have a right to say that. Just realize, though, that you really are on your own.
I know. I'm immensely aware, which is why I appreciate the conversation.
Okay, good.
No, I'm immensely aware that anywhere I walk, there are dramatic. I mean, I hold to open theism. I hold
Well,
to
so do we.
an evolutionary creationism. I mean, like there's a long list of things
well,
where
that's a different thing.
If
But
you
open theism, we're very much with you on that.
Right, but I mean, you pick your poison, and you're going to start dividing this up pretty thinly.
How can you ever keep the Lord's Supper though with another Christian? That troubles me. You
Well,
wouldn't
I would
because we're doing it not on Passover, we're doing it as and when. This then is not a Lord's Supper for you. That means you excommunicate us on that point. You cannot commune with us. That's all right. You have a right to do that.
Okay, so I would turn it the other way around. I would say you excommunicate me because I'm not a part of the communion. Whereas I would say anytime that we meet together and we eat and we fellowship, and our hearts are oriented towards God, that is this.
That's not meeting in church, though. It's not every. It isn't church. I mean, it isn't home. It's church. When you meet in church, that's quite distinct from home.
Well, I don't see in that verse where it says in church. I think it says as a church.
Check that out carefully. When you meet together in church, don't forsake the assembling together. You know the text, right? We're not talking about having meals at home. We're talking about when you meet together in church. That's a bad translation. En ecclesia, quite clear.
Yeah, as an ecclesia, because the church is not the building, right? The church is
no, of course not.
Yeah.
It's
so
a
anytime
formal
you meet
assembly
together as the people. Yeah.
Right, but I think what Anthony's saying is that you're redefining the word ecclesia as it's used in the New Testament. Anthony, is this your point? Ecclesia is used.
Meeting in church is quite clear. He says, "Don't forsake the assembling together." In Hebrews, that's church meetings. This is the same thing here.
So the word here in verse 22, for example, is ecclesia.
Yeah.
So the point is that he's not just talking about a group of people meeting.
When you meet together in church, that's a bad translation, whatever that is.
This is your paraphrase.
Yeah, I know. I've got that wrong. It'll be changed.
Okay.
So to answer your question, yes, I'm very careful about not liking church to be either, as you can, and Anthony can attest this, either an institution or a location or a physical structure. It's got to be the body of Christ is the church, right? So yeah, I don't even think you can meet together in a church because there's that's an anachronism. It's and in English, Sir Anthony could probably help me with this, but it doesn't come from like the Greek or not Greek, German or something. The word kirk.
Yes, that's an English word, but that's nothing to do with anything. The Greek text says, when you Christians meet for church service.
Yeah, come together
in church. quite expressly, you're not keeping the Lord's Supper, you should be. That's not eating at home, nothing to do with having a social meal. You can have a meal with the communion, yes, and we do, you could. But my point to you is that you are excommunicating us, and you, forcibly, we would invite you to take the communion with us. Absolutely we would. You wouldn't be able to do that. You say, I'm sorry, you're not doing this right. You're doing it more than once a year. Therefore, this is a huge issue.
Yeah, I get that. I get that. Well, so the difference is in our definition of what the Lord's Supper is. Is it a ritual memorial reproduction of that Last Supper that Christ and the apostles had that holds power and meaning?
I don't know what you mean by ritual. There are enough difficult words there. What do you mean a ritual?
I know it has negative connotation because that's how I think of it. Okay, so I'm reacting negatively against transubstantiation and literalistic views of that, right?
Oh, horribly. We do too.
So I know you would hold to sort of a memorial view of that, right? That it's done in memorial of.
You're actually reenacting the whole thing. You're bringing that whole event right into the present. I think that's what we believe.
Yeah.
In celebration of the death of Jesus and his resurrection.
Yeah.
Substitutionary. We believe in the substitutionary atonement of Jesus, and you do probably.
Yeah. Not penal, right? I've heard you say that.
No, I don't like penal, but substitutionary, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Died in our place. But this would not be close enough for you to accept our communion. You'd have to say, no, I can't do this because you're not doing it once a year.
So
which means you're keeping all the holy days, and there I think Colossians 2 intervenes. That's the problem.
Yeah, I mean, if you asked me over for dinner and we were going to meet as the ecclesia and pray and reflect, and one of us would have a prophecy and one of us would have a song and one of us would have a whatever, I would count that as a meeting.
Yeah, but it's not meeting in church. It's not what Paul means by meeting in church.
Oh, see, I think that's all there was in the first century, though, right? I mean, it's not like did they go and rent a hall and they all met in it? I mean, I think specific cases where
it could be in somebody's home, but there's a church meeting, which is not just talking to your Christian friends.
But by the way, just to be clear, there are systems, Anthony. I think the Spirit and Truth people do see it similarly, if not the same as what Brandon is.
Very similar. The Spirit and Truth people, you could join them, but they would say baptism doesn't matter, right? You don't believe that. They would say, let's talk and teach you to speak in tongues. You would be so alien to these other people. And also, unfortunately, on this point to us, that you are on your own and you have every right to be there as long as you realize that.
And also, I think the church at Sean Finnegan, Vince Finnegan, I think they also see it communion
as any meal that you'd have at any
meal,
So they would agree with you, but they wouldn't think you need to be baptized. You would disagree with that strongly.
Well, Sean believes in baptism.
Sean does, but the church SDF doesn't. And tongue speaking.
No, but I'm just saying, just to be clear, we're not isolating Brandon here as a lone wolf. Okay. There are groups out there that maybe you might be able to find commonalities with.
No. My point is, no, he wouldn't. My point to him is he has a right to be solo, but realizing you aren't absolutely solo might make you think. You couldn't join the Vince Finnegan people. You don't believe in learning to speak in tongues.
No.
Yeah, but you're revolted by that. You wouldn't go near.
But they don't
no commonality with them. None are on the tongues at all.
I'm trying to help you here.
Anthony, I hear you driving the point home that I should reevaluate some of these doctrines because it's okay to be in the minority, but if you're the only one, that's to be concerned.
Yes, that is my point. Absolutely.
I hear you.
I would, because some of us have also a little age and experience. Now, we've been entirely wrong, and we can be, for 60 years. But some example is given by others who came out of Armstrong. Some. It doesn't bind you, but that at least is a little warning light that maybe, I'm still an Armstrong person. We're the only people on the earth that get this right. And there's a lot of truth in that too, Bo.
And the Way International,
but the Way International is a horrible thing. You know that, don't you?
Well, I don't know very much. I know of them.
It's mass sex. It's worse than Armstrong. Be warned. It's no water baptism, which is flat out disobedience. It's you must speak in tongues. Let's teach you right now.
Wow.
Doesn't get any worse than that.
Not as a matter of salvation, though, right, Anthony? They're not Pentecostals. The X-Way people.
The X-Way people are against baptism.
Right, but you don't have to speak in tongues to be saved or anything.
Some of them not. I mean, they vary on that. But if you don't do water baptism and you do, can you be saved by not doing water baptism? That would be my question.
You still believe in water baptism, Brandon?
Yeah.
I hope.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
but not obviously. I look at the passage where Paul comes across the guys and they've been water baptized, and he says, "Well, have you been baptized in the Spirit?" And they say, "No, what are you talking about?" And so he kind of does it again, if you will. So I mean, obviously, there's more than just being dunked in the water that has to happen.
That was John the Baptist. The story was actually
Right.
you've only been baptized by John.
Right.
So now let's baptize you as a Christian. So that's obviously.
Yeah. No, I would agree. I mean, it seems to be a very difficult teaching to argue that water baptism is either forbidden or abandoned. I'm with you on that, but I haven't spent any time studying it.
I don't think you need to. I spare you. One of the problems with theology, as I look at it, is this endless down in the weeds fighting over words. The Bible was written for fishermen and farmers. And some of the argumentation that I hear against baptism is a desperate display of we don't understand the Bible. Let's face it. 48,000 denominations. So wherever the truth is, I suggest it's going to be very easy.
Unless it's been obscured by 2,000 years of accreted
That's
common
right.
sense, right?
Absolutely.
See, that's what gives me pause is on any particular doctrine.
Yeah.
We've got 2,000 years of cultural accretion.
That's
and
right.
That's why I'm very, very I take anything,
yes,
any subject, and I'm going to look at it pretty carefully because
absolutely.
I have been wrong. I'm sure I will continue to be wrong.
Well, I think your attitude is fantastic, by the way. You come over to me as very gentle and very, very open, very reasonable. That's wonderful.
Certainly trying to be. I've heard other people say that you're avoiding committing to God by being eternally a seeker, and that's certainly not my intent.
How about the text which says, ever learning and never able warning? That's what I see out there, of course. And we're doing our best. But I think Jesus will say, wait a minute, that Lord's Supper thing wasn't that hard.
Well, I'll go back to that. I will go back to that in particular.
Yeah.
Hard.
Just a comment by Robin.
Robin.
I think he's making the same one. 1 Corinthians 11 contrasts supper in homes and gathering in verses 20 and 22.
That point is clear.
Just eating a meal, then purposefully participating in Lord's Supper. And then there's verse 34. Says Robin, where it says, if anyone's hungry, let him eat at home, so that when you meet together, you will not bring condemnation on yourselves.
Contrast.
I intend to give you more directions when I visit.
Yeah.
I think, we made that point, Robin.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks.
I mean, it seems like somebody was eating all the chips at the Mexican restaurant and not sharing, and it was really bothering Paul that they were.
So this is Paul, the etiquette teacher, the teacher of etiquette in.
I don't want to be disrespectful.
In the homes of Christians. All right, I think we should wrap it up here. Go ahead, Brandon.
Well, no, I just want to say thank you, and
thank you.
I appreciate the work that you guys do. Obviously there are things that I'm not in lockstep on.
You're very reasonable, and keep us posted of where you get to eventually.
Well, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I'll stay in your hip pocket if you'll push back on me when you see things that you don't agree with. Well,
we're obviously differing on the holy days. We're saying flat out, do not keep these holy days. Don't do it. You're going under the shadow. Don't do it. Don't keep the whole law, whatever that is. Tell me next time, what is this whole law which you are forbidden to keep?
That's a date.
Then I'll be very happy.
That's a date. Yes, sir.
Okay. But your approach is admirable. It's absolutely admirable, really.
I'm counting on God knowing my heart, so that
of course,
if I'm in error, perhaps He'll.
That's exactly right. You can't. None of us can do more than that. That's right.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Pastor Todd and Baldwin.
Why don't you go to India for us? I mean, plan on you're a young fella. You can go to India. We can send you to India tomorrow. You have a marvelous time teaching them. or Indonesia.
Yeah, I need to not be lost first. So, so I can,
You're not lost. Norway, Sweden, the world, like Robin Todd, what he's doing out there, fantastic stuff. You are very gifted vocally, nice personality, tremendously experienced with Armstrong. Your dad did it for you.
All right. So thanks, Anthony. Thanks, Brandon.
Thanks. We'll talk again.
We'll leave you with this quote from Saint Ignatius. If we still live according to the Torah, we acknowledge that we have not received grace. I know Brandon loved that one. All right. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.